At a family meeting, my parents casually said they'd be using my inheritance to cover my brother's debts. I didn't say a word, just let them talk. They had no idea I'd already moved everything into a trust they couldn't touch. Zero access granted. My own family tried to rob me blind. Can you believe it? The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced, but little did they know, I was already 10 steps ahead of their greedy plan. My name's Melissa, and I'm 36 years old. I never in a million years thought I'd be fighting to protect my inheritance from the very people who were supposed to love and support me, my own parents. When my incredible grandmother, Eleanor, passed away, she left me a substantial amount of assets. Last month, at what they called a family meeting, my parents casually dropped the bombshell. They were going to use all of it to bail out my brother's gambling debts. They had no idea I'd already transferred every single penny into a trust fund they couldn't touch. The look on their faces when I told them? Absolutely priceless. Now, before I dive into the rest of this wild ride, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're into stories about standing up to family manipulation, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, what happened next will show you exactly why setting boundaries with family is sometimes the most important thing you can ever do. The text from my mother came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was just wrapping up with a client at my financial advisory firm in downtown Chicago when my phone buzzed. Family meeting this weekend. Important matters to discuss. Be at the house by 3 p.m. Saturday. No explanation, no context. Just the usual Martha Brooks command performance. I felt that familiar knot tighten in my stomach. In our family, important meeting had always been code for, Bradley needs something and you need to help. My younger brother, Bradley, had been the golden child since childhood. My parents would rush to solve every problem he encountered, while I was always expected to be the responsible, self-sufficient one who would, inevitably, clean up everyone's messes. Another family emergency? Veronica, my best friend since college, and now my business partner, leaned against my office door frame. She could read my expressions better than anyone. Apparently, I sighed, showing her the text. "Want to bet it's about Bradley again?" She laughed, a dry, knowing sound. "No bet. What is it this time? Another failed business venture? Divorce number 3? Tax problems?" I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache brewing. "I don't know, but it's important enough for a formal summons." What made the timing particularly suspicious was that it had been 18 months since my grandmother Eleanor passed away. Grandma Eleanor had been my rock, the one person in the family who truly understood me. While my parents doted on Bradley, she had taken me under her wing, teaching me about financial independence and self-respect. Her estate was substantial, a beautiful historic property in Vermont, a diverse investment portfolio she'd built over decades, and a collection of family heirlooms, including jewelry that dated back generations. The inheritance process had been slow, partly due to the complexity of her will, but the final distributions were scheduled for next month. And suddenly, my parents wanted an important family meeting. "You know," Veronica said carefully, "I've been hearing some things about Bradley through the grapevine. Cassandra at the investment firm mentioned seeing him at the Riverfront Casino several times last month." That caught my attention. "Bradley's gambling again?" Veronica nodded. "Apparently, he's been there almost every night, and not at the small stakes tables." A chill ran through me. Bradley had struggled with gambling in his 20s, burning through his trust fund before our parents bailed him out. He'd supposedly gotten it under control, but addiction rarely just disappears. That evening, instead of preparing for my client meetings, I found myself digging through old family financial documents. As both a financial advisor and the only family member with any actual financial sense, I had copies of most of the important family papers. Grandma Eleanor had insisted on it. What I discovered in those records changed everything. By the time I walked into that family meeting, I was 10 steps ahead of their plan to rob me blind. Growing up in the Brooks household meant understanding your role early. Mine was to be the responsible, level-headed daughter who never caused trouble. Bradley, 2 years younger, was the charming son who could do no wrong. When I got straight A's, my report card would be acknowledged with a nod. When Bradley managed to get C's instead of D's, there would be celebrations and rewards. "You don't need the praise, Melissa," my mother would say. "You're naturally good at school. Bradley has to work harder." This logic extended to everything. I didn't need attention because I was self-sufficient. Bradley needed constant support because he struggled. My salvation came in the form of my grandmother, Eleanor, my father's mother. A widow who had managed her late husband's manufacturing business for 20 years after his death, she recognized something in me that my parents overlooked. "You have a head for numbers and a strength they don't see," she told me during one of our weekend visits when I was 12. "They're so busy looking at what Bradley needs that they don't see what you have to offer." Grandma Eleanor became my mentor. While my parents took Bradley to sports games and movies, she took me to her investment advisor's office and taught me how to read financial statements. When I turned 16, she helped me open my first investment account with money I'd earned tutoring classmates. Financial independence is freedom, she would say. Learn to manage money, and you'll never be at anyone's mercy. I took her lessons to heart, majoring in finance at Northwestern and going on to get my MBA and financial advisor certifications. Meanwhile, Bradley dropped out of 3 different colleges before our parents finally stopped paying tuition. Instead, they funded a series of disastrous business ventures, a sports bar that closed within 8 months, an app development company that never developed a single viable product, and a luxury car rental service that somehow lost 6 figures before folding. After each failure, there would be a family meeting. My parents would explain how Bradley just needed one more chance and how families should support each other. These meetings inevitably ended with my parents restructuring family assets or taking out loans against their property to bail Bradley out. Your brother has big dreams, my father, Richard, would say defensively when I questioned these decisions. He's just had bad luck. It wasn't luck. It was incompetence combined with entitlement. Bradley expected success without work and rescue without consequences. The pattern continued into our 30s. I built a successful financial advisory practice, got married to Nathan, a software developer who saw through my family's dynamics immediately, and eventually divorced when our careers pulled us in different directions. Through it all, I maintained my financial independence, just as Grandma Eleanor had taught me. Bradley, meanwhile, cycled through jobs, relationships, and money as if they were disposable. By 34, he had 2 failed marriages, multiple credit card defaults, and a reputation in Chicago business circles as someone to avoid partnering with. When Grandma Eleanor became ill with cancer 3 years ago, I was the one who moved her into my guest room and coordinated her care. My parents visited occasionally, and Bradley showed up exactly twice, both times asking her for money while she was on her deathbed. During one of her final lucid days, Grandma Eleanor held my hand and told me something I would never forget. "I've arranged things to protect you, Melissa," she whispered, her once strong voice now frail. "The bulk of my estate will come to you, not because I love you more, but because you're the only one who understands its value beyond just money." She made me promise to use the inheritance thoughtfully, to maintain the Vermont property where 4 generations of our family had spent summers, to continue the charitable foundation she'd established, and to preserve the family heirlooms for future generations. "Your parents won't understand my decision," she warned. "They'll try to convince you to share everything equally, regardless of the consequences. Stand firm." After she passed, the initial reading of the will had gone exactly as she predicted. My parents were shocked to learn that while they received some specific bequests and Bradley got a modest trust that could only be accessed for education or starting a legitimate business with trustee approval, I was the primary beneficiary. "There must be some mistake," my mother had said to Calvin Spencer, Grandma's attorney of 30 years. "Eleanor wouldn't have wanted to create division in the family like this." "Mrs. Brooks, I assure you, Eleanor was quite clear about her wishes," Calvin had replied firmly. She revised this will 3 times in her final year to ensure it precisely reflected her intentions. In the 18 months since, there had been constant pressure, subtle comments at family dinners about what Grandma would have wanted, emails with links to articles about siblings sharing inheritances equally, pointed questions about when the estate would be settled. I had maintained my boundaries, politely but firmly, honoring my promise to Grandma Eleanor. The Vermont property was being restored according to historical preservation standards. The investment portfolio remained intact, with the specified portions of earnings going to the foundation. The family heirlooms were being properly cataloged and insured. Nathan had called me just last week, one of our occasional check-in conversations since the divorce. "How's the inheritance situation?" he'd asked. "Still getting pressure from the vultures, Nathan?" I'd admonished, though I couldn't help laughing. "They're still my family. Family doesn't try to separate you from what's rightfully yours," he'd replied. "Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing. She was protecting her legacy from their mismanagement." After hanging up, I'd reflected on how right both Nathan and Grandma had been. Just last month, I discovered that my parents had somehow accessed information about the estate accounts that they shouldn't have had, small inconsistencies in statements, questions they asked that revealed knowledge they shouldn't possess. Something wasn't right. And with the family meeting looming, I needed to find out what was really going on. The day after receiving my mother's text, I called Calvin Spencer's office and scheduled an urgent appointment. Calvin had been my grandmother's attorney for decades and was serving as the executor of her estate. If anyone knew what was happening behind the scenes, it would be him. His office was in one of Chicago's historic buildings, all polished wood and leather furniture that had been there since the firm was founded in the 1890s. Calvin, now in his 70s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, welcomed me with a concerned expression. "Melissa, I was actually about to call you," he said after his secretary had brought us coffee. "There have been some unusual inquiries about your grandmother's estate." "From my parents?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He nodded. Your father has requested copies of all account statements and property deeds. He claimed you had asked him to review everything before final distribution. Which I absolutely did not, I clarified. I assumed as much, which is why I didn't provide the documents. Calvin opened a folder on his desk. However, I've noticed some concerning account activity that I wanted to discuss with you. He showed me records indicating that someone had attempted to access the investment accounts using a secondary password that had been established during Grandma's illness. There were also inquiries to the Vermont Property Management Company about appraisal values and potential selling procedures. I don't understand, I said, though a sinking feeling in my stomach suggested I did. Why would anyone be looking into selling the property? Grandma specifically wanted it kept in the family. Calvin looked uncomfortable. Your father mentioned something about family financial restructuring that would be more beneficial given current circumstances. He implied this was being discussed with all parties. This is the first I'm hearing of it, I said, my voice tight. What current circumstances is he referring to? Calvin hesitated. It's not my place to speculate, but he did mention significant family obligations that needed to be addressed before the inheritance distribution. Bradley, I said flatly. This is about Bradley. Calvin didn't confirm or deny, maintaining his professional discretion, but his expression told me everything. I thanked him for his vigilance and asked him to continue preventing unauthorized access to the estate. Then, I made my next stop, the office of Dennis Watkins, the family accountant who had managed both my parents' and Bradley's finances for years. Dennis was less discreet than Calvin, especially after I pressed him about recent activities. Look, I'm caught in the middle here, he said nervously, straightening papers on his desk. Your parents asked me not to discuss this with you until after your family meeting. Dennis, these are my grandmother's assets we're talking about. I have a right to know if something's going on. He sighed heavily. Bradley's in trouble, Melissa. Serious trouble. Gambling debts, I guessed. Dennis looked surprised. You knew. I suspected. How much? Over $300,000 to some very unpleasant creditors. He lowered his voice. People who don't just send collection notices, if you understand what I mean. The amount staggered me. And let me guess, my parents want to use my inheritance to bail him out. Again. Dennis's uncomfortable expression confirmed it. They've asked me to prepare financial projections for using the most liquid assets from the estate to clear his debts immediately after distribution. Which assets exactly? He reluctantly showed me their plan: liquidate the investment portfolio, take a mortgage against the Vermont property, and sell the most valuable pieces of the jewelry collection. Essentially, they plan to dismantle everything Grandma Eleanor had specifically wanted preserved. Have they done this before? I asked. Used family assets to pay off Bradley's debts without telling me? Dennis looked even more uncomfortable. Your parents refinanced their home twice to cover Bradley's previous gambling losses. And 3 years ago, they sold some of your grandfather's coin collection that was supposed to be held in trust for both you and Bradley. That collection had been promised to us since childhood. I'd never received my portion and had assumed it was still in storage. After leaving Dennis's office, I went straight to my parents' house, knowing they'd be out at their weekly bridge game. I still had a key from when I would check on the place during their winter trips to Florida. What I was about to do wasn't strictly ethical, but I needed to know the truth. In my father's home office, I found folders labeled Family Trust Restructuring containing draft documents for a new family trust that would consolidate all of Eleanor's assets under my parents' control as trustees. Another folder held emails between my father and a different attorney, not Calvin, discussing how to challenge certain provisions of Grandma's will if necessary. Most damning was an email exchange between my parents discussing their strategy. Melissa will resist at first, but once we explain Bradley's situation, she'll come around. She always does, my mother had written. My father's response: if she doesn't, we can proceed with Plan B. The important thing is getting access to those assets before Bradley's creditors take more drastic action. Once everything's in the family trust, we can distribute as needed. There it was, in black and white. They were planning to use emotional manipulation to get me to hand over my inheritance. And if that didn't work, they had a plan B that involved legal maneuvers to seize control. I photographed the crucial documents with my phone and carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. As I drove home, I mentally cataloged what was at stake: the Vermont property that had been in our family for 4 generations, the stock portfolio worth nearly $2 million that Grandma had built meticulously over decades, and the jewelry collection that included pieces from the 1890s that had been passed down through the women in our family. All of it would be liquidated to pay off Bradley's gambling debts if my parents had their way. And once those assets were gone, they would be gone forever. The family legacy Grandma Eleanor had entrusted to me would disappear. By the time I reached my condo, hurt and betrayal had given way to cold determination. They thought I was the same passive daughter who would sacrifice everything for family harmony. They had no idea who they were dealing with now. The morning after discovering my parents' plan, I contacted Diana Roberts, a trust attorney I knew through professional circles. Diana specialized in asset protection and had a reputation for creative but impeccable legal strategies. Her office was sleek and modern, a sharp contrast to Calvin Spencer's traditional space, reflecting her contemporary approach to wealth protection. "Let me make sure I understand," Diana said after I explained the situation. "Your grandmother left you these assets in her will. The estate is in final probate and your parents are planning to pressure you into putting everything into a family trust they control so they can use it to pay your brother's gambling debts." "That's exactly right," I confirmed. "And they have a plan B that seems to involve challenging the will if I don't cooperate." Diana's expression hardened. "They don't have legal grounds to challenge a properly executed will simply because they don't like the distribution, but they could potentially cause delays and complications, especially if they're willing to make false claims." "What are my options?" I asked. "The strongest approach would be creating an irrevocable trust before they can act," she explained. "Once assets are in an irrevocable trust with you as both grantor and beneficiary, they're protected from exactly this kind of family pressure. Your parents would have no legal means to access them." "How quickly can we set that up?" Diana checked her calendar. "I can have the documentation ready by tomorrow afternoon, but we'll need to move fast to transfer the assets before your family meeting." "When is it scheduled?" "Saturday at 3. That gives us 3 days. It's tight, but doable." She began taking detailed notes. "We'll need to contact Calvin Spencer immediately to coordinate." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Diana drafted the trust documents while I worked with Calvin to prepare for the asset transfers. The process was complex, requiring different approaches for each type of asset. For the investment portfolio, we needed to establish new accounts in the name of the trust and execute transfer instructions. For the Vermont property, we needed to prepare and file a new deed. For the jewelry collection and other physical assets, we needed to document their transfer to the trust's ownership. Thursday evening, I was at Diana's office signing the final trust documents when my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. "Don't answer," Diana advised, sliding another document toward me for signature. I silenced the call, but moments later, a text appeared. "Why were you asking Dennis about Bradley's finances? We agreed to discuss everything at the family meeting. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." I showed Diana the message. "They know I'm onto them." "All the more reason to finish this tonight," she said firmly. "Let's complete these signatures." By Friday afternoon, the investment accounts had been successfully transferred to the trust. Calvin had expedited the property deed filing for the Vermont house. The final step was retrieving the jewelry collection from the safety deposit box at my parents' bank. This was the riskiest part of the plan. The box was in my name, but it was at the bank my family had used for generations, where the staff knew my parents well. If someone mentioned my visit to them, they might realize what I was doing. As the bank manager led me to the vault, my heart pounded. The safety deposit box contained not just jewelry, but also small family heirlooms that Grandma Eleanor had specifically wanted me to have, her mother's silver compact, the pocket watch that had belonged to her father, and a collection of handwritten family recipes dating back to the 1880s. As I opened the box and saw the familiar blue velvet jewelry pouches, I felt a wave of emotion. I carefully unwrapped the emerald necklace that Grandma had worn on special occasions, remembering how she had placed it around my neck on my college graduation day. "This will be yours someday," she had said, not just as jewelry, but as a reminder of the women in our family who made their own way. Now, I was ensuring that her wish would be honored. I signed the necessary documentation to remove all items from the box, placed everything in my bag, and left the bank without incident. By Friday evening, I met with both Calvin and Diana to verify that all assets were secure in the irrevocable trust. The timing had been perfect. Everything was officially transferred less than 24 hours before the family meeting. "Your grandmother would be proud," Calvin said, a rare smile crossing his usually formal features. "She always said you had a backbone of steel when it mattered." "What should I expect tomorrow?" I asked them both. "They'll be shocked, then angry," Diana predicted. "They might threaten legal action, but there's nothing they can actually do. The trust is ironclad. Just remember," Calvin advised. "Keep your emotions in check, no matter what they say. The moment this becomes about family feelings rather than legal rights, they'll try to manipulate you." That night, I barely slept, rehearsing what I would say and how I would respond to their inevitable arguments. By morning, I felt calm but alert, like a chess player who had anticipated her opponent's move several turns in advance. As I drove to my parents' suburban home that afternoon, I thought about all the previous family meetings where I had acquiesced to maintain peace. All the times I had put Bradley's needs before my own because it was expected. How different today would be. I parked in the driveway of the colonial-style house where I'd grown up, noting that Bradley's new Audi was already there. Apparently, his gambling debts hadn't affected his car choices. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my documentation folder and walked to the door, ready for whatever came next. The heavy oak door of my childhood home swung open before I could even ring the bell. My mother stood there in her powder blue cardigan and pearls. The picture of suburban maternal perfection. "Melissa, finally." "Everyone's waiting in the living room," she said, her voice carrying that artificial cheerfulness she used when orchestrating one of her scenarios. She hugged me briefly, the scent of her Chanel No. 5 bringing back a flood of memories, not all of them pleasant. The living room was arranged like a stage set. My father occupied his usual leather armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed some documents. Bradley slouched on the sofa, his expression a mix of anxiety and entitlement. He barely looked up when I entered. "Drink," my father offered, gesturing to the cocktail cart where he'd already prepared his standard Saturday scotch. "Just water, thanks," I replied, choosing the armchair furthest from Bradley. I needed a clear head for what was coming. After a few minutes of my mother's forced small talk about neighborhood gossip and the weather, my father cleared his throat, the traditional signal that the real meeting was about to begin. "Melissa, we've asked you here today to discuss an important family matter," he began, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he'd used throughout my childhood. "As you know, family has always been our highest priority in this house." I nodded, but said nothing, allowing him to continue. "We've faced challenges before, and we've always overcome them by supporting each other," he continued, glancing at my mother, who nodded encouragingly. "That's what families do. They stand together during difficult times." "Richard, just tell her," my mother interjected with feigned impatience. "Melissa understands family loyalty." My father adjusted his glasses. "Your brother has experienced some financial setbacks recently." Bradley shifted uncomfortably on the sofa but remained silent. "The nature of these setbacks isn't important," my father continued. "What matters is finding a solution that works for everyone." "I think the nature of the setbacks is very important," I said quietly. My mother shot me a warning look before jumping in. "Bradley has had some gambling issues resurface, but he's getting help now, aren't you, Bradley?" Bradley nodded without making eye contact. "Yeah, I'm going to meetings and stuff." "The immediate concern," my father pressed on, "is addressing certain financial obligations that have become rather urgent." "You mean his gambling debts?" I stated flatly. My father frowned at my directness. "As I was saying, with your grandmother's estate finally being distributed next month, we've worked out an arrangement that makes the most sense for the family as a whole." He slid a folder across the coffee table toward me. "We are establishing a new family trust that will consolidate all of Eleanor's assets. Your mother and I will serve as trustees, ensuring everything is managed properly for everyone's benefit. The first priority," my mother added smoothly, "would be resolving Bradley's current situation, but ultimately everything would still be family property. It's what your grandmother would have wanted." I didn't touch the folder. "Is it?" my father continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Calvin Spencer has been less than cooperative with our requests, which has been disappointing. But our attorney assures us this new arrangement is legally sound. We just need your signature on these documents." He pulled out a pen and held it out to me expectantly. The silence stretched as I made no move to take it. Bradley finally looked up, his expression darkening. "Just sign the papers, Melissa. Don't make this a bigger deal than it needs to be." Still, I said nothing. "Perhaps you don't understand the severity of the situation," my mother said, her voice taking on an edge. "Bradley owes some very dangerous people. This isn't just about money." "How much?" I asked. My parents exchanged glances. $327,000, my father finally admitted. "Plus another $80,000 to the IRS, my mother added reluctantly. "And the loan from Uncle Frank," Bradley muttered. "So over $400,000 in total," I summarized. "And you plan to pay using my inheritance?" "The family's assets," my father corrected sharply. "Eleanor's estate belongs to the family." "Actually, it doesn't," I replied calmly. Grandma Eleanor was very specific about her wishes. The Vermont property is to be preserved for future generations. The investment portfolio is to continue funding her foundation. The family heirlooms are to be protected, not sold. Those were general sentiments, not legal requirements, my mother dismissed. "The will gives you technical ownership, but Eleanor always intended these assets to benefit the entire family." "And bailing out Bradley's gambling debts benefits the family, how exactly?" I asked. Bradley slammed his hand on the coffee table. "For God's sake, Melissa. They're trying to keep me from getting my legs broken. Or worse. Is that what you want? To see your brother hurt because you're being selfish." "That's enough," my father said sharply, though it wasn't clear whether he was addressing me or Bradley. He took a deep breath and tried a different approach. "Melissa, we understand this isn't ideal, but it's temporary. Once Bradley gets back on his feet, the trust will still hold all the assets for everyone's future benefit. We've helped you plenty over the years," my mother added, though we all knew that wasn't true. "Now it's your turn to help your brother." I looked at each of their faces. My father's stern confidence, my mother's manipulative concern, Bradley's desperate entitlement. They were so certain of how this would play out, so sure that I would eventually give in, as I always had before. I think there's something you should know about Grandma's inheritance, I said finally. As of yesterday, I continued, meeting each of their gazes steadily. All assets from Grandma Eleanor's estate have been transferred to an irrevocable trust with me as both grantor and beneficiary. The Vermont property, the investment portfolio, and all the family heirlooms are now legally protected. None of you can touch them. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's mouth opened and closed without sound. My father's face flushed a dangerous shade of red. Bradley stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. That's not possible, my father finally said. The estate is still in probate. Final probate, I corrected. Calvin expedited the last distributions at my request, and Diana Roberts helped me establish the trust immediately afterward. Diana Roberts? My mother repeated. You went behind our backs to another attorney? Just like you went behind my back to another attorney to try to challenge Grandma's will, I countered. Yes, I know about Plan B. My father's expression confirmed everything. You had no right to do this. I had every right, I replied. They're my assets to protect, and that's exactly what Grandma Eleanor wanted me to do. Bradley suddenly sprang to his feet, his face contorted with rage. You selfish expletive. Do you have any idea what these people will do to me if I don't pay? Bradley, my mother gasped, though whether she was shocked by his language or the confirmation of the danger, I couldn't tell. You've always been like this, he continued, pacing now. Always thinking you're better than everyone, always judging me. The perfect daughter with her perfect career who never needed help from anyone. That's not true, I said. I worked for everything I have. The difference is that I don't expect others to bail me out when I make bad decisions. My mother rose and came to sit beside me, taking my hand in hers. Her voice became soft, cajoling, the tone she had always used to get her way. Melissa, darling, I understand you're upset that we didn't discuss this with you earlier. That was our mistake. But surely you can see that Bradley's life is potentially in danger? As a family, we need to protect each other. I gently but firmly removed my hand from hers. I agree that Bradley needs protection. From himself and from your enabling. This has to stop. You have no idea what you're talking about, my father interjected. Bradley has a disease. Addiction is an illness, not a choice. I know that, I replied. And the appropriate response to illness is treatment, not financial bailouts that allow the behavior to continue. We can fight this in court, my father threatened, lawyer mode fully engaged now. You violated the spirit of your grandmother's will. No, I've honored it explicitly, I corrected. And you're welcome to challenge the trust in court, but Diana assures me it's ironclad. All you'll accomplish is spending more money on legal fees that could be better used solving the actual problem. Bradley had moved to the window, his back to us, shoulders rigid with tension. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who'll be dealing with Vinny and his guys. Who exactly did you borrow from, Bradley? I asked. He turned, his expression a mix of defiance and fear. Does it matter? Money's money. It matters if they're loan sharks or worse, I replied. That's not just gambling. That's getting involved with criminals. Don't be so dramatic, my mother interjected. Bradley borrowed from some private lenders when the banks wouldn't help. It's not ideal, but it's not organized crime. The way she avoided my eyes told me she was lying. This isn't getting us anywhere, my father said, his tactical mind clearly searching for a new angle. Melissa, the trust may be irrevocable, but as the beneficiary, you can still direct distributions. You can choose to help your brother without dismantling the entire structure. That's true, I acknowledged. But I won't be doing that. Then you're choosing to put property and money above your own brother's safety, my mother said, her voice hardening. I never thought you could be so cold. I'm choosing to end a destructive pattern, I corrected her. One that you and Dad have enabled for decades. Don't you dare blame us for this, my father said, his voice rising. We've done everything possible to help both our children succeed. No, you've done everything possible to protect Bradley from consequences, which is very different from helping him succeed. I stood up, gathering my purse. I'm not going to participate in this cycle anymore. If you walk out that door, my mother said, her voice trembling with either genuine emotion or a theatrical effect, you're turning your back on this family. I'm not turning my back on anyone, I replied. I'm just refusing to set myself on fire to keep everyone else warm. We'll contest the trust, my father called as I reached the doorway. We'll claim undue influence, mental incapacity on Eleanor's part, anything we can. You'll be tied up in court for years. I turned back. And how exactly will that help Bradley with his immediate debt problem? Because those private lenders don't typically wait for family court disputes to be resolved. That silenced him momentarily. This isn't over, Bradley said, his voice low and threatening. You think you're so smart, but you have no idea what you're doing. I looked at each of them one last time. These people who were supposed to be my support system, but had instead tried to manipulate and use me throughout my life. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said quietly. For the first time, I'm honoring Grandma Eleanor's wishes and my own boundaries at the same time. As I walked to my car, I could hear Bradley shouting obscenities from the doorway. My mother called my name repeatedly, her voice shifting from anger to pleading. My father remained silent, which was somehow more unsettling than their emotional outbursts. Once inside my car, the composure I had maintained throughout the confrontation finally cracked. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, and tears blurred my vision. I had anticipated their reactions logically, but the emotional reality of standing against my entire family hit me with unexpected force. I drove to a nearby park, parked in a secluded spot, and finally allowed myself to cry, for the family I wished I had, for the grandmother who had tried to protect me, and for the brother who might never find his way to recovery. As I sat there, trying to collect myself, my phone rang with an unknown number. Thinking it might be Diana with updates, I answered. "Melissa, it's Thomas. Thomas Brooks. My father's estranged brother, whom I hadn't seen in over 15 years. How did he even have my number?" "Uncle Thomas?" I said, confused. "Calvin Spencer contacted me," he interrupted. "He thought I might have information that could help you understand what's really going on with your parents and Bradley. We need to talk in person. There's more to this situation than you know." I met Uncle Thomas the next morning at a quiet cafe downtown. I barely recognized him. The last time I'd seen him was at a family funeral when I was in college. Now in his late 60s, he had the same Brooks family features as my father, but with deeper laugh lines and gentler eyes. "You look like Eleanor," he said as I sat down. "She would be proud of what you did yesterday." "You know about that already?" He smiled wryly. "Richard called me in a rage last night. Apparently, I'm still his go-to when he needs to vent about family betrayals. Ironic, given our history." I vaguely remembered childhood whispers about Uncle Thomas being cut off from the family after some business disagreement with my father. "Calvin said you have information about my parents and Bradley?" Thomas nodded gravely. "Your parents aren't just trying to bail out Bradley this time. They're trying to save themselves." Over the next hour, Thomas revealed a financial history I'd never suspected. My parents had been covering Bradley's gambling debts for over a decade, far longer and more extensively than I'd realized. What had started as paying off a few thousand in college had escalated to hundreds of thousands by the time Bradley was in his 30s. "The first major crisis was 8 years ago," Thomas explained. "Bradley owed almost $200,000 to some serious people. Your parents remortgaged their house and liquidated most of their retirement accounts to cover it." I had no idea, I admitted. "They were too proud to let anyone know, especially you. Richard always resented how easily financial success came to you while Bradley struggled." The next bombshell was even more shocking. My parents were essentially broke. Between Bradley's debts, bad investments of their own, and their determination to maintain appearances, they had depleted nearly all their assets. "The family home has 2 mortgages against it now," Thomas said. "Richard's law practice has been losing money for years. Most of his clients moved to younger firms with more modern approaches. They've been living on credit cards and home equity lines while waiting for Eleanor's estate to solve everything." "But why didn't they just tell me the truth?" I asked. "I would have helped them, not with Bradley's gambling debts, but with their own financial situation." Thomas smiled sadly. "Control. Richard has always needed to be the provider, the patriarch. Admitting financial failure to his daughter, who excels in finance. He couldn't do it." Thomas then handed me a folder containing bank statements, property records, and loan documents, evidence he had gathered over the years as he watched the family spiral from a distance. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked. "Because unlike Richard and Martha, I think Bradley can still be saved, but only if the enabling stops completely." His expression hardened. "And because Eleanor asked me to keep an eye on things. She knew they might try to use her estate to bail everyone out one last time." Armed with this new understanding, I arranged another family meeting this time, on my terms, at my condo. With Calvin and Diana present, my parents arrived looking defensive. Bradley came separately, appearing exhausted and defeated. "Before we begin," I said once everyone was seated, "I want to make something clear. This meeting isn't about negotiating access to Grandma Eleanor's assets. The trust is established and will remain intact. We're here to discuss how to actually solve the problems we're facing, not just put a temporary financial bandage on them." My father started to object, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. "I've spoken with Uncle Thomas," I continued. "I know about the remortgaged house, the depleted retirement accounts, and the extent of Bradley's debts over the years." My parents exchanged alarmed glances. "Thomas had no right to share private family matters," my father began. "Like you had no right to try to seize control of my inheritance?" I countered. "We're past privacy concerns now. This is about survival. Bradley's literal safety, your financial security, and the preservation of Grandma's legacy." I turned to my brother. "Bradley, I need you to be completely honest. What's the full extent of your current debts, and who exactly do you owe?" Bradley looked at our parents, who nodded resignedly. Finally dropping the facade, he detailed gambling debts totaling nearly $450,000, spread across casinos, credit cards, and yes, loan sharks with connections to organized crime in Chicago. They've given me until the end of the month, he admitted, his voice hollow. After that, they start taking collateral, which could be anything from breaking my legs to forcing me to do things for them to work off the debt. And your gambling addiction? Are you genuinely seeking treatment? Bradley stared at his hands. I've been to 2 Gamblers Anonymous meetings. It's harder than I thought it would be, admitting I can't control it. I turned to my parents. And your financial situation? No more half-truths. With obvious reluctance, they confirmed what Thomas had told me. They had less than $20,000 in savings, massive mortgage debt, and credit card balances that kept them awake at night. My father's law practice was barely covering its overhead. They had been counting on Eleanor's estate to solve everything at once. Here's what's going to happen, I said after everyone had finally laid their cards on the table. I'm not going to dismantle Grandma's legacy to enable more destructive behavior. But I'm also not going to abandon my family. I outlined a 3-part plan. First, Bradley would enter a residential treatment program for gambling addiction, fully paid for by my personal savings, not the trust. But his continued support would be contingent on his full participation in recovery. Second, I would help my parents develop a financial recovery plan, including possible downsizing, restructuring my father's practice, and legitimate debt consolidation. Again, I would provide some personal financial assistance, separate from the trust. Third, we would address Bradley's debts strategically, negotiating with legitimate creditors for payment plans and working with appropriate authorities to handle the loan sharks. I would contribute to legitimate debt repayment, but only after treatment was underway and only for documented debts. This is conditional assistance, I emphasized. I'm helping with recovery, not enabling continued destructive patterns. If anyone returns to old behaviors, the support stops immediately. You're in no position to dictate terms to us, my father began. But my mother interrupted him. Richard, stop. Just stop. Her voice was tired, but clearer than I'd heard it in years. Melissa's right. We've been handling this all wrong for too long. Bradley looked up, surprise registering on his face at our mother's words. We've failed you, Bradley, she continued, tears forming. Not by refusing to pay your debts, but by always paying them. By never requiring you to face consequences. It was the first genuine moment I could remember witnessing between them. Over the next 3 hours, we hammered out details with Calvin and Diana's help. My parents agreed to financial counseling and transparency. Bradley committed to the treatment program, starting the following week. We established clear boundaries and expectations for everyone. As they prepared to leave, Bradley hung back, waiting until our parents had gone outside. I don't deserve your help, he said quietly. This isn't about deserving, I replied. It's about family helping each other in ways that actually promote healing, not harm. He nodded, understanding passing between us, perhaps for the first time in our adult lives. The following week, I drove Bradley to the treatment center, a respected facility outside the city. As we pulled up to the entrance, he turned to me. I'm terrified, he admitted. That's good, I told him. Fear means you're finally taking this seriously. What if I fail again? I considered this carefully. Then you'll have to find the courage to try again. But this time, you'll do it knowing that I'm supporting your recovery, not your addiction. There's a difference. As I watched him walk into the facility, I felt something I hadn't expected, hope. Not certainty, but possibility. It was a beginning. 6 months later, I stood on the wide porch of the Vermont property, watching autumn leaves drift across the lawn. Grandma Eleanor had always said fall was when the house looked its most beautiful, with the red maple trees framing the white colonial structure against the mountains beyond. The restoration was nearly complete. I'd honored Grandma's wishes by working with historical preservation experts to maintain the property's original character while updating the essential systems. This weekend was my first day since the work had been finished. My phone buzzed with a text from Veronica. How's the solitude treating you? Ready for visitors yet? I smiled as I replied, maybe next weekend. Still processing everything. And there was much to process. The past 6 months had been a journey of establishing new boundaries and rebuilding relationships on healthier terms. Bradley had completed the 90-day residential program and was now living in a transitional recovery house while attending daily GA meetings. He had secured a job at a local garden center, modest work compared to his previous business ventures, but steady and stress-free. Most importantly, he was taking responsibility for his recovery, one day at a time. My parents had made changes too, though not without resistance. They had finally sold their large family home and moved to a comfortable condo. My father had merged his struggling practice with a younger firm, where he now worked reduced hours as an of-counsel attorney. Their finances were still tight, but they were no longer drowning in debt. Our relationships remained fragile. There were still tense moments and old patterns that threatened to resurface. But there was also new honesty between us all. My parents had stopped pretending everything was perfect, and I had stopped expecting them to be different people. "You've changed them," Veronica had observed during our last lunch. Standing firm actually forced them to grow. They changed themselves when they ran out of alternatives. I had corrected her. I just refused to be the alternative this time. Now, sipping coffee on the porch that had witnessed 4 generations of family gatherings, I reflected on what this inheritance truly meant. Yes, there were the material assets, the property, the investments, the heirlooms. But Grandma Eleanor had left me something far more valuable: the courage to establish boundaries and the wisdom to recognize the difference between helping and enabling. A car appeared on the long driveway. Unexpected, but instantly recognizable. Nathan's blue Subaru. We had been in more regular contact lately, our friendship rekindling now that the wounds of our divorce had healed. "Hope you don't mind the surprise visit," he called as he got out of the car. "I was driving to Burlington for a conference and remembered you were here." "Perfect timing," I replied, genuinely pleased to see him. "Coffee's fresh." As we sat on the porch talking, I found myself sharing the full story of the past 6 months, something I hadn't done with anyone except Veronica. "I'm proud of you," Nathan said when I finished. "I always knew you had this strength in you. Your grandmother saw it too." "Sometimes I still feel guilty," I admitted, like I should have done more sooner. "You did what you could when you were ready," he said simply. "That's all anyone can do." Later that afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Bradley. "Just checking in," he said, his voice steadier than it had been in years. 6 months clean today." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely proud. "How are you feeling?" "Grateful. Scared sometimes, but mostly just present." He paused. "I wanted to thank you. Not just for the treatment, but for not giving up on me completely. You would have been justified if you had." "That's not what family does," I replied. "Real family holds each other accountable, but doesn't abandon each other." After we hung up, I went to the library, Grandma Eleanor's favorite room in the house. I had preserved it exactly as she had kept it, with the leather-bound books on the shelves and her reading chair by the window. From the desk drawer, I took out a small box containing the emerald necklace she had promised me on my graduation day. As I opened it, a folded piece of paper fell out, a letter I had never seen before, in Grandma's distinctive handwriting. "My dearest Melissa, if you're reading this, then you've taken possession of the Vermont house and found this letter where I knew you would eventually look. I want you to know that I left you these assets not just because you were the only one who would protect them, but because you were the only one who understood their true value beyond money. Family legacy isn't about property or jewels. It's about values that endure: courage, integrity, self-respect. You have all of these in abundance. There may come a time when Richard, Martha, and Bradley will try to claim what I've left you. Stand firm. Not out of selfishness, but because sometimes the greatest gift we can give others is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. Whatever happens, remember that the most valuable inheritance I could give you isn't stored in bank vaults or property deeds. It's the strength I see in you, the strength to make difficult choices and to live with integrity, even when it's painful. All my love, Grandma Eleanor." Tears blurred my vision as I carefully refolded the letter. She had known all along what might happen and had prepared me, not just with assets, but with the wisdom to protect them. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at the house. My parents, Bradley, Nathan, Veronica, and Uncle Thomas. It was the first time we had all been together since the confrontation 6 months ago. There were awkward moments and old tensions just beneath the surface, but there was also laughter and genuine conversation. As we sat around the dining table that had hosted Brooke's family gatherings for generations, I realized that this imperfect, complicated, evolving relationship was also part of my inheritance. Not just the property and assets Grandma Eleanor had legally left me, but the family she had always hoped we could become. Some inheritances aren't stored in bank vaults or property deeds. The most valuable things my grandmother left me were her courage and self-respect, and those are things nobody could ever take away. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have protected your inheritance or shared it with family despite their intentions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story about standing up for yourself while balancing family loyalty, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in self-worth and courage. Thank you for watching, and may you find the strength to set boundaries in your own relationships when needed.